Alright, so I finally decided to upload another video after a month, pretty much. And this one I am thinking about starting a new video series, which may or may not succeed, but I'll try, which is defending bad arguments, then debunking them. And the first topic I'm going to do is misogyny. So how would this defending bad arguments work? So I will list several points and attempt to defend them, which are based in this case it is defending misogyny and justifying it. And after stating all my points and my supporting evidence, I will debunk them. Now, I must say, disclaimer, my content is based on my own opinion and thus should not be expected to be true or relevant to any real world situation. Basically, you should not take my opinion as fact. Now, I don't want any of you to get misled by what I say and basically say, oh, I saw this video and thus it must be true. No, I am still pretty much just a kid or a young adult, okay? Like, this video could be insightful or it could not be, but you should not take my words as hard facts, okay? These are just my opinions, and this is more of like a fun project I'm doing that should maybe be taken seriously, but I don't care if you do, and you shouldn't if it actually matters. So, obviously, the first thing we need to do is that we need a framework that we need to argue for. In my case, it's going to be maximizing the chance of humanity being preserved. So what do I mean by that? So, humanity being preserved. That means that there's at least one person alive, right? As you can see here, it doesn't matter if there's 1 or 50 people, it satisfies the condition of preserving humanity. Now, obviously, generally having 50 people in most situations increases the chance of humanity being preserved compared to one person in general. And if you think my framework is invalid or doesn't fit like a certain topic, you can suggest one in the comments if you really feel like it. But this is my first video, so I'm going to stick with this one. Now, the second thing we need to do is defining misogyny. Now, how I'm defining it is someone thinking that for a particular task, women are worse than men despite reality saying otherwise. And if you want a more clear-cut picture, it's basically someone having a stronger negative bias towards women than men despite it being incongruent with reality, like not aligned with, basically. So, this is the first point. Women should be lower on the social hierarchy than men. So, the first point, which is dictated by these pink brackets, and these arrows list the chain of reasoning. So, for example, the first point is men are generally more assertive and more willing to take risks than women are. So it's basically like saying, well, men are more assertive and they're more willing to take risks compared to women. I'll go on the debunking after I say all my points, not on the first one and then debunking them later. And so then, because of that, that means that they can more easily express their decisions and problems about the society they live in, which means they are more insightful about society's faults and are more willing to do potentially helpful actions that are ambiguous, which is basically a fancy way of saying they're more likely to take risks. This has nothing to do with the previous sentence. I'm sorry, I wrote this in like an hour, and I have a lot of slides. So yeah, this is basically what it's saying. It's like, they are more insightful about society's faults because they're more assertive and more willing to take risks, and they basically have more experience, is what I'm saying, and are more willing to do potentially more risky things that may be helpful. So that's one of the reasons why women should be lower on the social hierarchy than men. Now, the second point, pink brackets right here, men are traditionally the breadwinners. So like in the culture, they are usually the providers. They're the ones that provide for the society. They do the work, that kind of thing. And since they're more willing to work and do the work and the more difficult activities, they're willing to do the work and more difficult activities. Sorry, the grammar's a little weird. Sorry. Like I said, I wrote this in like an hour. It's basically saying they are more willing to do the work because they have been conditioned to be breadwinners, right? So they are more likely to do the hard work that most people won't do. So then that means that people who are more willing to do work should be regarded as more important. And since because men are generally more inclined to go towards more inclined to become breadwinners and are incentivized to become more productive, that means that obviously women should be on the lower social hierarchy because men are more likely to provide more output to the society. Now, the second point is present-day women, are too assertive, but can't take accountability. Now, the first point is that the culture of feminism has caused women to be more masculine, independent, and assertive. But the ability to take accountability for the newfound control has not changed. It was supposed to be has right here, sorry. Women are so then that means women are more inclined to make decisions and not analyze the risk properly due to accountability not catching up. Sorry, I'm a little tired. So that basically this is saying that women are more inclined to make decisions with underestimating the risk of making those decisions because they are not used to the increased accountability from their position, which has not caught up. So they think they have less accountability than they should, but in reality, if a man were to do it, then they would have a greater amount of accountability. So then that means because they are more likely to make riskier decisions because the accountability has not caught up to them, our standard for women should be less than men for doing work and in general being like a useful human being, that kind of thing. The second point, with these pink brackets obviously, women expect to be independent but also want a male that can provide for them. This is the assumption, right? So women expect to be independent, but also want a male that can provide for them. And as a result, this shows that women want all the benefit without giving anything in return. Because obviously, if you want to be independent, you shouldn't want any help, or you are self-sufficient by yourself. But you still also want a man to provide for you. So that means women want all the benefit without helping other people. And so then our standard for productivity of women should be lower because they're not willing to give back to the community as much compared to men are. Sorry. Now, the third point is that it makes culture more consistent. For example, here's the reasoning. Misogyny helps conform women to specific gender roles. That's the point. And so, as a result, it makes their options and work more consistent and predictable. Because if you have a very rigid framework on how to govern society or govern a group of people, then obviously you can easily predict what they're going to do, and there's not a bunch of jumbled mess that you can't predict or that you don't know how to manage. So, and it's easier to manage and maintain for the society because it is more consistent and predictable. Now, the second point is that misogyny also helps reduce complications because the system is simpler pretty much, and the easier framework can be taught to more people and be adjusted a lot easier. That means because misogyny simplifies society group dynamics within the society, the framework can be more easily taught to a lot more people and be adjusted a lot easier because it's simpler. And so then it's easier for the society to manage its citizens and sort of know how to increase productivity and adjust things. The fourth point is makes people who challenge the status quo stronger. Now, here's what I mean. So for example, some women won't fit well into the misogynistic framework and some will attempt to challenge it. As a result, the people who challenge it might receive hate and threats. If they cannot be physically harmed, this bit is important right here. If they can't be physically harmed, then this makes them more mentally tough, which makes more capable people. Because if people can handle the disrespect that comes at them, then obviously it makes them more mentally tough, which is good. Because if they're more mentally tough, it's generally better. I think most people can agree on that. Now, the second point is that some women won't fit well into the misogynistic framework, and some will attempt to challenge it, which is the same reasoning as above. And the people who challenge it might receive hate and threats, which is the same as these 2 points above. Now, this means that this causes the more logical women that are being discriminated against would analyze and see that those arguments are actually wrong. And so then it indirectly makes more intelligent people, because it's sort of like natural selection, right? It makes the more logical ones persist and do a little bit better than the ones who are not as logical. And so then they see that the attacker arguments are probably wrong, and so then they indirectly become more intelligent. Now, the fifth point is that it limits bad choices. For example, women are more emotional, which causes their framework to have a higher chance of not being aligned with the societies. So then, if given more choices, they may stumble across a choice that benefits them but harms the society. Which, yeah, this is the reasoning. And this is basically the reasoning for the 3 points, because there's another one over here, but because I couldn't fit them all on one page. So, for example, the second point is that misogyny limits choices for women by conforming them to their gender roles. So that because gender roles are generally pretty simple, if they are generally pretty simple, so then if misogyny limits women to those gender roles, then obviously less likely to stumble upon bad choices. And now bad choices we've established is that choices that the person thinks is beneficial, but is actually not beneficial to the society. So then that benefits society indirectly, because if you limit the possible choices that someone has, they are less likely to stumble upon a choice that is good for them, but not good for the society. Now, this is the last point for limits on bad choices. Women are more emotional. From that point, from here, right? Women are more emotional. And so then they have a higher likelihood of not understanding the dynamics of their country or society. So that means if given the freedom, they have a higher chance, this means that they have a higher chance of selecting an option that harms society. So that means in some cases, choice is not a good thing. And sometimes it's better to constrain someone's worldview. Now, time to debunk this stuff. So the first point, as you can see, I color-coded it very well. So this is the first condition, second condition, and third condition. And then they're all in the colors, and then these are the counter-arguments. So women should be lower on the social hierarchy than men. So the justification is men are generally more assertive and more willing to take risks than women. Generally true, with some exceptions, obviously, in my opinion. And the second one, which is orange, that means they can more easily express their decisions and problems about society. Now that is kind of the problem. Yes, that is generally true, but what if the male is misinformed and not super willing to learn? Like, these are like the conditions in order for this to be sort of true. Is that like, sure, you can express their decisions and problems about the society, right? But the thing is, you need to be able to change your thinking process, your thought process, so that you can adapt and actually create better decisions in the future. So yes, this is only true if the male is not misinformed and not super willing to learn. Now, it's actually okay if the male is misinformed if they're willing to learn. But the thing is, if they're so misinformed and they're such a high, powerful position that the risk of them damaging the society from the choices they make because they think it's good but actually isn't, then it's a little bit of a gray area there. But yes, they need to be sort of rational beings. Not perfectly knowledgeable, but just rational. Now the yellow is saying they're more insightful about society's faults, and helpful actions are ambiguous. And like I said, this like borrows the exception from the orange point, which is it's only if the men are willing to learn and are somewhat knowledgeable and sometimes taking risks, and also sometimes taking risks when you have no safety is dangerous. So this is like, for example, if someone is very misinformed and in a very powerful position, and then they decide to make a decision and the chance of that decision going wrong could be very high, and the effects could be very large. And also, and like I said, it only applies if the men are willing to learn and they're somewhat knowledgeable. Now, the second point for women should be lower on the social hierarchy than men. So the red point is men are traditionally breadwinners. This is generally true with some exceptions. Sorry. Now, the orange point, they're more willing to do work and the more difficult activities. It's pretty darn obvious. If a culture supports men being breadwinners, then it will show. That's pretty obvious. Now, the problem is with the third point. The people who are more willing to work should be regarded as more important. The problem is with that is that what if there's a woman who works best like a man? Like, for example, someone that contradicts the culture that they're in. Then the opportunity cost of not allowing her to defy the culture and basically work like a man might be too much. Because obviously, if that woman is naturally bad at doing what a woman is supposed to do in this sort of patriarchal culture or whatever, then obviously that's a lot of wasted effort. Because why do something that you're bad at when if there's decent demand for like male jobs or whatever that you can do really well? So in certain situations, this can actually be detrimental because you are sacrificing potentially more output from your citizens or people who have a diverse skill set. Now the second point, it is that women are too assertive but can't take accountability. So the first point is that the culture of feminism has caused women to be more masculine, independent, and assertive, but the ability to take accountability for their newfound control has not changed. Yeah, the mistake is still there, as you can see. And so this is generally true with some exceptions, I believe. So then, the orange point, which is women are more inclined to make decisions and not analyze the risk properly due to their accountability not catching up. I know, my phrasing and grammar is a little weird. So then, obviously, this makes sense. Like here, accountability is a factor. But we can't reliably measure a person's decision making. So the thing is, someone might have like a very low sense of accountability, but the thing is, they might have other factors that might compensate for the lack of accountability or feeling of accountability that they have. The thing is, the fact that we can't reliably measure a person's decision making, we can't really make these predictions about how saying, oh, they are more inclined to make decisions and not analyze the risk properly due to their, this is mostly true. But the thing is, obviously, in some cases, it's not. For the people who actually recognize that, hey, even though my accountability or the punishment for me making a mistake is very low, I should be weary of it because, I need to actually do things that are proper and not stupid. And so then our standard for women should be less than men. So then, obviously, it has the same problem as this point right here, which is, what about the outliers that don't fit well in the system? Basically, women that are like this, but the thing is, don't suffer from the problem of lower accountability, doing stupider decisions. So then, this means it's more like a problem with the culture, right? Because the thing is, the accountability for the newfound control has not changed. So that's kind of like, I think that is kind of a problem with the culture that came before feminism. And then feminism was like, oh yeah, we should women should be more independent, more masculine, that thing. But the thing is, the lessened accountability of previously not being as independent, as masculine, or as assertive has not changed to meet that standard. So this is what this thing is saying. I guess that means we should change the culture. That's what it means. A second point of women being too assertive but can't take accountability is this. Women expect to be independent but also want a male that can provide for them. This is a 50-50, I think, because obviously most women are not dumbasses who think that, hey, just like I can do things and I need more benefit. I need more, it's like, sorry, need to collect my words here. It's like it's like most women realize that, hey, if I do work, right, and and society expects me to be independent, then obviously I should not rely on other people all the time and actually be fucking useful. That's kind of the thing. Now, it's a 50-50. That's why, because some women are not like that, and it's mostly due to culture. Mostly the Western culture, I think. I'm not sure, because I don't know enough about America or Europe, but I think it's because of the Western ideology. So, then the orange. This shows that women want all the benefit without giving anything in return. The thing is, if your field of view is only this, then it makes sense. But the thing is, we're justifying saying, hey, we should put a stronger negative bias on women, even though reality says, hey, they should be even, or women should be better. So then the thing is, we're basically saying, okay, women are worse. Women are worse in this case. Women are worse at being providers, and they're better at being leeches, is what this is saying. But the thing is, this applies to men and women, because if you remove all the accountability that men have, they will act exactly like this. So the thing is, like, if you just look at this, it seems perfectly fine. But the point we're arguing is that women should be given more negative bias or disadvantage when compared to men in certain scenarios, even though they should be even. So then this argument doesn't work, because we're trying to say that women are worse, but the thing is, this applies to men and women. So technically they're equal, which is contradictory to what we want, saying that, hey, women are actually worse in this area. And then, obviously, the last bit is our standard for productivity of women should be lower. No, we should put more measures in place to punish the behavior in red, which is people expect to be independent, but also want people to provide for them. We should put more behavior to punish this behavior. We should put more guidelines or measures in place to punish this behavior, because the thing is, if people expect you to be independent, you can't be asking help for all the time. Like, if people expect you to be independent and actually do things, then you can't be asking help every single second. And also it applies to anybody, and obviously not just to people who are women, but technically everybody, because this applies to everybody right here. So yeah, this argument is technically not flawed, but it's targeting the wrong groups. It should be targeting everybody, not just women. That's the problem. Now, the third one is makes culture consistent. So, misogyny helps conform women to specific gender roles. That is true if the system is understandable to most people. Now, the second point, which is makes their options and work more consistent and predictable. Now, this is only true if the system is simple and understandable. Then yes, because then people actually know what to go for. Everything is actually somewhat understandable. Easier to manage and maintain for society. Now, both these points is actually okay. But the thing is, the last point assumes that the leader of a country is actually knows how their society functions. Like here, if there's a leader of a society does not know how to run their society, then it's counterproductive. And it's counterproductive to limit people's options if you don't know what you're doing. That's what I think. Now, obviously, if the system's going fine and you don't need to do anything, then obviously, maybe it's okay. But if you actually want to continue to preserve humanity and you don't know anything about how humans interact and economics and everything, you just don't know how to run a country, then limiting people's options kind of limits some of that innovation, limits some of your experience that you can have to benefit your country. Now, the second point for makes culture more consistent is that misogyny helps to reduce complications. And this is similar to the last one. but it's basically like instead of making someone's options more consistent and predictable, it's basically saying, okay, it can spread faster and it can be adjusted a lot easier. So it's a lot easier for a society to manage its citizens and to change the framework if it doesn't work, because it's easier. So then, yes, technically the top one is technically true, yes. If it's understandable and simple, the system, if it's understandable and system, then yes, it is true. Now the orange is the same logic. If the system or framework that your society runs on is understandable, then it's true. Now, and the yellow suffers the same problem as this yellow. That is, if someone has absolutely no idea how to manage a country, then obviously this would probably be counterproductive, because if you need experience on how people act, then obviously you kind of want to give people options to see like, to get as much experience as possible. Sometimes that's not true, I think, but yeah. In some cases, this can be counterproductive to people who don't know what they're doing. Now, the fourth one makes people who challenge the status quo stronger. Now, this one's more psychology, I think, and so it's just a little more complicated, and my reasoning might not be true, but you read the disclaimer, so you should know. Now, the red one is that some women won't fit well into the misogynistic framework, and some will attempt to challenge it. That is true, because if someone doesn't fit well into the framework and gets absolutely socially shunned by it, obviously they'll be like, hey man, like maybe like your framework is actually wrong. And the people who challenge it might receive hate and threats. This is only true because it uses the word might receive, because that means might receive is like a cheeky little trick. It's basically saying, okay, in like out of all the situations, in one situation this can happen. Yeah, so technically this orange line is true because it uses might receive. Now, the yellow is if they can't be physically harmed, then this makes them more mentally tough. Sometimes true. Now, it has this condition right here. If they can't be physically harmed. Because obviously, I think physically harming someone does not really increase, actually most of the time hurts their ability to do work and productivity and everything. So then, but this still has a problem. Even it says if they can't be physically harmed, it still has a problem. Because some people might not be prepared for it. Some people might not be prepared for the insults and hate that they're going to get from challenging the framework. And so then the result is makes more capable people. Now, obviously, going off of the yellow point, if someone cannot handle the pressure but is very capable, that's wasted potential. Basically saying, if someone's really smart but they're really sensitive, then obviously you're wasting a lot of their potential by just keeping, like, by trying to make them stronger, And maybe someone doesn't have as much of a motivation to become like smart or capable or whatever. So then they're just going to stay in the status quo. So it's just wasted potential, wasted productivity. Now, the second point is that it makes more intelligent people. Now, why? Because some women won't feel basically this is the same as the last one, except it's like a little it moved a little bit because my formatting isn't that great. But the result is, from all the hate and threats, the more logical ones would know that some of the attackers' arguments are wrong. So the thing is, it makes them more inclined to fight back and adapt, is what this point is saying. And so then the people who challenge, assuming that there's no physical attacks or whatever, and then thus it makes more intelligent people. And red is true, like the last one, it's true. And orange is true, again, because it says might receive. So the same logic here. And yellow has the same problems and same benefits as the last one. It is sometimes true because some people might be very logical but not logical enough. And also, what if getting disrespected reduces their thinking ability? So like, it's basically the same argument. Like, what if someone cannot adapt to the pressure what if someone's really sensitive and cannot adapt to the pressure that's putting on them and like the perceived hate from them getting from them challenging the framework of the society? And thus green is a little bit invalid because of yellow, because like, what if they can't handle it, but they're also very capable as a human being if given the right environment that's totally feasible? And that's wasted potential. Like I said, if someone's really smart but really sensitive, then obviously, they can still do well, but they can't in this environment. So yeah, that's a lot of wasted potential and wasted labor there. And then the final 3 points, which is limits bad choices. So the first one is women are more emotional. Probably generally true. I don't know enough about women, okay? Like, this one's up to your interpretation. I think it applies to some people, but it's not enough to classify it as the majority, or it applies to the majority of people. The orange one is that their framework has a higher chance of not being aligned with the societies because they're too emotional. More emotional, sorry. And orange is true, if red is true, obviously, because that's how this chain of logic actually happens. And then if given more choices, they may stumble across a choice that benefits them but harms society. And this has the same problem as the other ones, as the first point and the second one, which you'll see here. Yeah, what about the yes? Yeah. So that's kind of the problem with making a standard, right? Is that what happens if some of the people don't fit very well, but if you just do a little bit of adjustment that wouldn't take too much effort, they can actually do really well. So yeah. So the argument is, what about the wasted productivity of someone? My argument is, what about the wasted productivity of someone who's actually really smart, but doesn't realize it because their choices are limited unintentionally by the framework. Sorry, had a little brain fart there. Now the next one is the same thing. It limits women's choices by conforming them to gender roles, less likely to stumble upon bad ones, and benefits society. Now this goes off of women are more emotional, so that we should put more limits and thus justify misogyny on women. And so this is most likely true, if this is true. So, and then less likely to stumble upon bad choices. If women are more emotional, then true. So it goes off the previous one. And then benefit society. Obviously, true if the prerequisites are true, but it has the same problem, which is, what if there's someone who's really good, but can't handle it and don't want to change? Yeah, exactly. What if the environment does not allow someone who's really smart or really capable to utilize their potential? And this is the last point, which is women are more emotional, which is basically women have a higher chance of selecting an option that harms society because they're more emotional, and they have a higher chance of not understanding the dynamics of their country, and thus have a higher chance of selecting an option that harms society. And red is most likely true with the previous ones. I don't know why I wrote most likely true. It is generally probably true, but I don't know. Just take this with a grain of salt, like I said with the disclaimer. Now, the orange point is mostly true because usually the emotion of an individual usually doesn't align with maintaining a society. And because women are more emotional, that means they have a higher chance of not having their framework align with the society, or having longer periods of time where their goals are not aligned with the society. And higher chance of selecting the option that harms society. Again, if prerequisites are true, then yes, it works. But again, what about the outliers? They're actually capable, but yeah, you get my point. And also, another thing that I forgot to write down here is that it also doesn't include the men outliers who are like the stereotypical woman. That's something I forgot to mention. So yeah, it also, this outliers thing also includes people who don't conform to the system very well, and don't conform to the system very well and cannot adapt very well. And what if they can unleash their potential or their capabilities? And that's done. So the thing is, probably gonna upload another video in a month because I'm still in school. I got things to do. So yeah, see you all next time.